It's interesting, isn't it, that the last moon attempts were made during the height of the Cold War between Russia and America, and now once again we've got Russia sending a lunar spacecraft to the moon to try and get there before India, by the way. And the Indian spacecraft took off a while ago. It's doing lots of circles around the Earth, and off it goes to do more circles around the moon and then drop onto the moon. The Russian spacecraft is going to go more directly, a whoomp. And it is, isn't it ironic? If we look back at history, we can see a clear pattern. And at the same time, we've got Russia trying to do a moon landing, India taking money from us and from other countries to help with poverty, and yet sending spaceships up to the moon. And meanwhile, explosions rocking the Ukrainian capital, and Russian claiming that it has downed Ukrainian drones west of Moscow and on the approach to Sevastopol. War, which is never quite defined as war, but which is nevertheless being observed, recorded, and transmitted almost as it happens across the world by television, by mainstream media, by telegraph, and so on. We've never seen a war so hastily reported and so vividly reported, and it seems to have so little effect on the rest of the world. Meanwhile, Turkish news channels are saying that Putin is preparing to attend the G20 summit in India in September. How on earth he intends to attend and not get arrested, and why the G20 dignitaries would not arrest Putin, I don't understand. I could imagine Rishi Sunak making a citizen's arrest. If he dared. It's just madness, and we're in a sort of madness at the moment. And meanwhile, we've got problems in Africa, which are being taken advantage of by Russia, by the Wagner mercenaries. The hand of Putin is over everything because the countries in the West who ought to know better are completely distracted. Britain with Brexit, America with Biden, Europe with whatever is distracting Europe. I was going to say something to do with Germany, but I don't suppose that necessarily is the case. But we are distracted, and we are allowing this monster to gain control and to destroy himself in the process. I've always thought that, with a kind word and a nudge, Mr. Putin would be back into the real world, and Mr. Putin would wake up from his from this possession by evil. But there is no room for a nudge because no one's talking to him, because he's not talking to anybody else. He's living in an echo chamber. It's as if he's watching YouTube and obeying the YouTube algorithm and only seeing things which agree with his point of view. Well, we know how that goes. He's poised over the nuclear trigger, and that doesn't do anybody any good. We need to hear voices that don't agree with us. We need to hear other points of view, and that's why it is so important that people on the comment section don't seem to understand where I'm going. People seem to think, you've got to be very blinkered. No, you've got two hands. You've got one hand to help Mr. Zelensky, and you've got the other hand to reach out and continue talking to Mr. Putin. The fact that you are having negotiations doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get anywhere. It simply means you're talking. what Churchill called jaw, better than war. We're not at war, but we're also not doing any jaw. We're just mute. And that doesn't do anybody any good at all. We're mute because we think that sanctions do some sort of good. Sanctions do no good. They simply stop our trade and they stop Russia's trade and they make everyone frustrated. We've had years of applying sanctions to different countries to know that it isn't remotely successful. It's a nonsense. It's simply a self-satisfied shrug from the people who are imposing the sanctions. It keeps them happy. It keeps us happy, so to speak. But it doesn't have a huge effect. Iran just tightens its belt, and people in Iran who want to do trade go to Turkey. Russia is in much the same position. In fact, flights from Turkey to Moscow are now being diverted for their own safety to St. Petersburg because of drones. Russia is getting round the problems because Russia's big enough to get round these problems. What we need to be doing is making sure that Mr. Zelensky is in a position to resist the invasion and that he has as much support as he needs. But at the same time, we need to be talking to Putin to keep him human. Human again. Anybody can become human again. But Putin is quickly departing from humanity into some sort of devilment. And if you go back to, you have to remember my background is in theology, is in the study of religion. So you must excuse me constantly seeing religious parallels. But if you go back to the old language that Catholicism used to use about demonic possession, it starts with interest. And then the demonic possession begins to attack, begins to besiege the individual. And that's called obsession. An obsession with something, we use it in a very casual way. But obsession comes from the Latin word obsedere, the Latin verb, which means to gather round, to besiege a city. And eventually, that siege can work, and evil takes over. And that's called possession. And then we're calling in an exorcist. Now, you may not believe in demonic possession. You may not believe in sort of the hocus pocus, you may call it, of religion. But the language is there, and the language tells us something important. So in the same way as demonic possession comes from outside, with our encouragement, so too good ideas come from outside, with our encouragement. We talk about inspiration, and that again comes from two Latin words, in and spiro. Spiro, to breathe. Inspiration, you're never inspired by yourself. You're inspired by something you see, something you notice, somebody else, someone you talk to. Inspiration is about seizing an idea, making it your own, making it so much your own that you are breathing it. And if you're not talking to somebody else, then you cannot be inspired. If Putin's only world is Putin, how can he possibly change his mind? How can he possibly be inspired to do good? He is surrounded by cronies who tell him every day that he is right. And one of those cronies is a supposed man of God, himself, a man clearly obsessed with evil. Patriarch Kirill. And why do I know that? Because I've looked at the size of his cufflinks. And a man of God is not walking around weighed down by the gold on his sleeves. Or, indeed, the value of his Rolex watches. No. We need to be talking to these people. We need to engage them in conversation. We don't necessarily need to think that we're going to win in those conversations. We just need to be there, in the room, as Hamilton would say. In the room. Because if we're not in the room, we can't possibly hope to influence and inspire these people who at the moment are wrong. And the same thing is true, incidentally, of Rishi Sunak and the present Conservative government. If we isolate these people, then we cannot inspire them to do good. If no one talks to Suella Braverman, poor dear, then she's just going to get more and more deluded. She's going to be screaming more and more at the dispatch box about Albanians or Pakistanis or whoever her next victim might be. She writes on a broad canvas. You've got to remember, she doesn't identify individuals. She takes on an entire nation, an entire race, an entire country, and hammers home the xenophobia. And that's not our way. But who is she listening to? Just a question.